Good morning, everyone. This is Michele Hughes from Ageless and Timeless. My guest today is someone that I've been talking to for many, many months, and he was recommended to me by one of my very favorite podcast hosts, and her name is Lisa Tamati, and she has a podcast called Pushing the Limit. So whenever Lisa calls me or texts me and says, there's somebody I want you to meet, I listen, and this was the case with Dr. John Lewis. So we had a chat a few months ago, and now I'm very excited to have him here today. So welcome, Dr. Lewis.
Thank you, Michelle, for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, congratulations on your new baby.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's exciting. No sleep, though, huh?
No sleep. I'd be sleeping right now otherwise already.
Yes, yes. Well, I was looking back at our notes, and then I've been taking your supplements. So I'm going to talk about those in a moment because I'm so excited to tell you my feedback on them. But I wanted to start off by just asking you to give us a little summary of how you got to where you are today, the journey that you've taken. I know you were very big in exercise and fitness, and just tell us what were some of the most memorable steps that have gotten you to be the human giant that you are today?
I would say the very first step was my grandfather pitching baseball to me in the backyard when I was probably 3 or 4 years old, and it put me on a track of playing sports most of my childhood. And in my teen years, I played pretty much anything with a ball other than soccer. And then after all of that ended in high school and college, I got into drug-free competitive bodybuilding, and I did that for a few years. And I realized pretty quickly I was not going to make a living as a bodybuilder. As I mentioned, I was drug-free, so I wasn't willing to take the risk of using drugs, and I didn't think I'd make much money doing it anyway. So that phase didn't last too long. But what that phase of my life did accomplish was that it changed my outlook or my perspective on nutrition, going from I think most Americans look at food as just for taste, not really considering the impact on health. So it totally changed my perspective on diet and food, and how food, just like exercise and physical activity, affects the body. But it still didn't really, again, it was more of a physical sports performance perspective as opposed to a health performance. But then a number of years later, after I got out of bodybuilding, as I was beginning my research career, I met a couple of people who introduced me to their journeys on polysaccharides. And at that point in my life, I didn't really have any great appreciation for saccharides other than being a source of fuel for the cells. That was really all I had learned about them in school. And I didn't even really consider anything else beyond that. But meeting Dr. Reg McDaniel and Barbara Kimley, two people who, again, had profound journeys in their own lives, Dr. Reg on the aloe vera side and Barbara on the rice bran side, just completely changed my perspective. And so I think a big reason of why I'm sitting here talking to you today, and why I get interviewed by other people, is because it changed not only my career, but my life, in the sense of appreciating how these two plants, rice and aloe vera, provide these nutrients that are so beneficial for humankind. And so we ended up conducting, here we are close to 20 years later, after meeting Dr. Reg and Barbara, here we are, my colleagues and I have conducted all this research. I'm no longer in academics full time, but we conducted all this research that led to the product that I'm now selling today as a businessman. And so I've just had an incredible opportunity of, as the Beatles said, being on this long and winding road of this journey of nutrition, and specifically in polysaccharides, and of course still exercise and physical activity being a very important part of who I am and what I do, but really more focused on the nutrition side, and even more specifically the polysaccharides, and how I'm educating people about these saccharides that, again, I mean, when you think of aloe vera, most people only think of aloe vera for a topical solution. They don't even have a clue what taking these polysaccharides from aloe vera can do for them health-wise. And so the research we conducted in Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, HIV, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, we've published some just incredible findings from all of this work. And so here I am today talking to you about this work and our research and
And
polysaccharides and my mission.
and you've been talking for 20 years to a lot of people. You've had 180 scientific studies, right? So that gives you a lot of meat on the bone. But I think we should start at the basic vocabulary. Let's define what a polysaccharide is for our viewers and listeners, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. It's a very important place to start. So, first of all, saccharide, sugar, carbohydrate, generally speaking, those are synonyms. And we as Americans, for the last at least half century, have been so conditioned to think every time we hear the word sugar, it only means one thing, bad. There's
Right.
no possibility that you could take sugar or you could eat sugar and it would be good for you. But what people need to understand is there are four types of sugars that occur in Mother Nature. You have monosaccharides, disaccharides, oligosaccharides, and polysaccharides. And I mention those in order of increasing complexity. So a monosaccharide, a simple sugar like high fructose corn syrup, is generally speaking not good for you if you're overloading yourself on high fructose corn syrup. Take that all the way to the end, the polysaccharides that I mentioned that come from aloe vera and rice bran. These are complex sugars. Look at the root of the word polymini saccharide sugar.
Mm-hmm.
These are hundreds of glucose units attached together by very sophisticated glycosidic bonds. They have incredible structure to them. They have more density of information than amino acids, fatty acids, certainly vitamins and minerals. So these are the most complex structures that you would consume, generally speaking. And so when you look at these complex sugars compared to, again, a simple sugar like high fructose corn syrup, they're just completely different. So it drives me absolutely crazy when I hear some, supposed expert in public health or nutrition or whatever out there talking about all sugar is bad for us. That is a garbage statement. It's factually untrue. It's ignorant at best. And these people going around saying that need to do their homework because they are, as we say, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. They're lumping all sugars in one basket, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not the way to look at it. It's like saying all cars drive the same. That's
Right.
that's a stupid statement. It doesn't make any sense. Who would take you seriously if you said, yeah, every car drives the same? A Toyota drives exactly like a Cadillac or a Ferrari. That doesn't make any sense. Same thing with sugars. There's no general blanket statement that we can make about how sugars affect us. So what we've shown time and time again is, again, not only are these sugars not bad for you, they are actually arguably some of the most beneficial nutrients provided to us by Mother Nature. I mean, I would put them really at the top of the list compared to anything else, curcumin, ginger, any other plant you can think of.
Mm-hmm. Maybe the better thing is if those so-called experts would just differentiate and say, the simple sugars, the
That's
sugar cane, are the ones that you need, or their derivatives like high fructose corn syrup. If they could just be a little more specific. I think that's one of the problems in medicine is that things get to be generic, and then people just accept that generic and do not look further into the details. So I think you have a very good point, and I'm glad you're out there educating people because honestly, most people have never heard of a polysaccharide, and if they have, they don't know what it is. So
that's right.
we're doing a big service. You're doing a big service here to educate and humanity on the not only the discernment and the differentiation, but just how valuable they are in our diet. So why aloe vera and rice bran and not like mushrooms, for example? Why there are polysaccharides in other uh, nutrients? So how did you decide on those two? Today's podcast is brought to you by International Anti-Aging Systems and Profound Health. The founder, Phil Mickens, has been a guest on Ageless and Timeless, and those who know him personally, as I am so fortunate to do, can attest to his knowledge, experience,
authenticity, and his passion to help make the world a better place, with a commitment to work profoundly to improve our health. I personally have used the peptide bioregulators, some of his hormones, and his skincare products, and I can attest to their efficacy. If you want those unique and value-added evidence-based health products, then IAS and Profound Health are your #1 resource. We're going to flash on the screen the different websites that you can use in order to order their products. And no matter which website you go to and which products you order, please use the Ageless code for a 15% discount.
Again, it was strictly through my association with Dr. McDaniel and Barbara. I mean, Dr. Reg, a pathologist by training in the Dallas area, this man has had an incredible life. I think now Reg is like 88 years old, still goes to his office every day. Like us, still fighting the good fight, still looking for money to do research. But Reg was introduced to this aloe vera product about 40 years ago. I think it was 85, 86. So he's on like a 40-year journey. He's like double the time invested that I have. But this man ended up leaving his practice. He was running a pathology unit at a hospital in Dallas to basically practicing nutrition based on the discoveries that he and his colleagues at Texas A&M were making with these allopolysaccharides. And then Barbara was a patient here. She used to live in the Fort Lauderdale area, and she was a patient at the University of Miami. She had metastatic disease from the thyroid, had the typical conventional approach, surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, and was still given a terminal diagnosis, and then found this rice bran product and ended up extending her life for 9 years. I met her about 4 years post 6-month prognosis. So you can imagine how talk about, having a bully pulpit. I mean, this lady would tell you for hours how much this rice bran had saved her life. So it was simply due to the associations with Reg and Barbara that I was able to conduct all of this research, that we focused on these two particular plants. But you're absolutely right. I mean, every vegetable, every grain, every seaweed, every mushroom, they all have some level of polysaccharide content. And when you have things like, lion's mane mushroom, that's one of the mushrooms that's gained some recent popularity. I mean, certainly those things have effects due to their polysaccharide content. Michele, I just haven't had the opportunity. I mean, there are just only so many, years in your life that you have to do certain things. I've just focused on the two from aloe vera and rice bran, really. I mean, with all due respect to all the other plants out there, I just don't know too much about them, just because, again, there's so much to know and only so little time that you have in your life. But
and you're doing so much in depth, and with so many diseases that you're looking at, and the impact of the polysaccharides on those diseases. So obviously Alzheimer's being the most recent and the biggest. So take us back to the Miller School. We talked about the fact that my sister was very good friends with Leonard and Sue Miller, both of whom unfortunately have passed away now. But I think you remember when you and I spoke, I mentioned that to you. So I have a lot of high regard for that school, because I met the couple when they were much younger, many years ago, and heard the full story of how they evolved to that place. So what led you there, and what did you do there, and how did that influence what you're doing now?
Well, I ended up attending the University of Miami to do my PhD because I wanted to move from Tennessee, escape the cold weather, and be somewhere in the country where it was warm and close to the ocean. So really, you don't have too many choices unless it's Florida or Hawaii, and I hadn't been to Hawaii at that point in my life. But
or California.
California's too cold for me, but that's okay.
Okay.
But anyway, I met a psychologist at the medical school, and during my first year at the university, I met a psychologist who was working at the medical school doing research. And so anyway, that was how I got connected into the medical school. And I actually knew Sue a little bit myself. Unfortunately, that was more toward the end of her life, and I didn't really have much of a chance to get too involved with her. But I didn't know Leonard at all. But I spent about 20 years there conducting research full time. And toward the end of that 20 years was when I really got pretty burned out on essentially begging the government, foundations, individuals like the Millers that have a lot of money to do research. It's not really a nice way to make a living. It's very stressful, especially when you're doing research in nutrition that's considered kind of black sheep-ish, if you will. Like if you're not doing it at a very conventional place like the University of Miami that depends on all this big pharma funding,
Right.
if you're not doing research in pharmacology or even genetics,
Right.
then you're struggling. I mean and I'm just being very honest here. You're really struggling to make a living, to keep your lab going, because you're just not doing research that pays the bills per se, and that 90 something percent of the people around you are doing. So it's difficult to make a living that way.
Yeah.
And it was only through the generosity of this one family who spoke with Dr. Reg after the wife of this husband and wife had listened to Dr. Reg give a lecture one day about some of the work that he was doing with the polysaccharides with people with Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
Mm-hmm.
And so this lady approached Reg after his lecture. She said, "Wow, this is very interesting." She and her husband started a relationship with Reg, and then they decided to make a donation to research
Mm-hmm.
on the polysaccharides based on what he had talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Their only requirement was that they wanted us to do the research in people with Alzheimer's because they had lost 4 family members to the disease.
Mm-hmm.
And so they made a donation. Reg was not affiliated with any university or research organization at that time. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and now here I am today. And so we ran the clinical trial in Alzheimer's, which even today, I mean, again, I'm no longer in academics, but today, as far as my academic or research career goes, that is the highlight of my career, simply due to the fact of what we discovered. We put them on this formula that we now call daily brain care, and we assessed them over a 12-month intervention. We tested their cognitive function at baseline, 3, 6, 9, and 12 months. We drew their blood at baseline in 12 months. And Michele, quite frankly, we discovered things in that study that are unparalleled. No other study has shown similar things. So these were people with moderate to severe severity, which is basically the worst level of severity of this disease. They were on average 79.9 years of age, so relatively older group of folks. And they also didn't just have Alzheimer's, they had diabetes, depression, different forms of heart disease. So very impaired as well. At 9 and 12 months, we showed clinically and statistically significant improvement in cognitive function according to the ADAS-Cog, which is the gold standard for assessing cognitive function, particularly in people with any form of dementia. That's unheard of. That is unheard of. There's no other study. Any of your listeners can go to PubMed themselves, do their own literature search. You will not find any other intervention that showed that kind of an effect.
Mm-hmm.
You can look at the 5 FDA-approved drugs for dementia. They do basically nothing. If you're lucky, they will delay progression of the disease. But you can look at any type of diet, any other dietary supplement, exercise, hyperbaric oxygen, red light therapy, acupuncture, anything. Just take your pick. Nothing else has shown that kind of an effect. And remember, this is a disease that as you progress through it, you lose your cognitive function. And also, most people, I think they sometimes tend to think that cognitive function is synonymous with memory. Memory is only one part of cognitive function. So you have multiple domains of cognitive function. For example, your ability, your executive functioning ability, your processing speed,
Right.
your recall, your orientation to space, time, all these different things. So it's not just your short-term and long-term memory. There's a lot that goes into your cognitive function.
Right. Are you familiar with the test called the WAVI? WAVI?
I have seen that, but I'm not familiar with it. I haven't used it in any of our research.
Yeah, I'm going to connect you with Roberto Bateta, who is the one of the partners in that company, and they were literally right next to Roberto's booth at the A4M show in Vegas last December. And I took their test through Roberto. I took the test, and it tests all those areas, like how quickly can you make a decision, and what is your reflex speed, and you know, all of that good stuff. Good news is I came out really well. Really, he said I was top percentile, but you know that the other thing that came up when I was discussing it with him was how much influence does the APO for allele, the genetic test, have on the people that you were testing? And if, in like an example, did you ask all of those participants if they had the positive result on that genetic test?
We did not have, we had, again, remember, this was private money. This was not from, you
Yeah.
know, government or some big organization. So we were pinching pennies and nickels and dimes. I mean, we didn't even draw blood at 3, 6, 9, and at 3, 6, and 9 months, which we, you know, wanted to do. We only had money to draw blood at baseline in 12 months. So we didn't do any genetic testing in that study, unfortunately. We
Some,
actually have the samples stored in a freezer. So anybody out there listening who may feel inspired or compelled to donate money to research, we actually still have all of the samples stored in a freezer. We could actually go back, and I don't know how much, you know, we potentially can do with those samples in terms of what you need to do genetic testing live, you know, with a fresh sample as opposed to frozen. But there are still lots of questions that need to be answered. And that's why I still have, again, even though I'm not in academics full time any longer, I still have ultimately a goal to do additional research.
mm-hmm.
But you know, research takes a lot of money, and that's part of the reason why I'm no longer in academics. So I didn't realize it at that moment, but when we published our first article from 2013 in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, which were the most extensive amount of results we published 4 papers from that study now. But I tried 2 times with NIH and 2 times with Alzheimer's Association prior to leaving academics full time over the next couple of years, and I got that much in return.
Well, hang on, because if Robert F. Kennedy gets confirmed in the new administration, hopefully there'll be a lot more opportunity for tests that are, you know, in the integrative and functional side of things with plant-based diets and so forth. So, and your test and your research may be far more acceptable or valuable even to them. So that's something to, you know, I'm glad that you kept frozen samples. That was really smart to do. Well, you know, so much of the talk today is about the microbiome and how the gut affects the brain. And as a baseline, did you do a questionnaire, or how did you find out whether these people were really toxic? And you know, you said they had a lot of other issues besides just Alzheimer's, which that's enough in and of itself. But did you actually look into their condition of their microbiome?
No, we focused more on the immune system. We didn't, I mean, again, you know, in a very conventional place, you only can do so many things. Rather than looking at the microbiome, we chose to focus on the immune system simply because the immune system it's not just our first line of defense against infection. It's so much more than that in the sense of how it crosstalks to all the other major organ systems. And so we wanted to look at the role of the inflammatory markers, overall immune system functioning, adult stem cell production. We even, in our last paper we published a little over a year ago, we showed how the Th1 and Th2 components, the pro versus the anti-inflammatory side of the immune system, were affected as well. But for example, we showed an improvement in overall immune function according to the CD4 to CD8 ratio. That's your ratio of helper to cytotoxic cells. So that's very important for all of us, not just for people with Alzheimer's disease. We showed in TNF alpha and VEGF, which are proteins commonly looked at in heart disease and cancer. Our paper was probably the first one that published that in people with Alzheimer's disease. And then we showed just under a 300% increase in adult stem cell production according to CD14 cells over that 12-month period as well. So those findings, again, were probably some of the first findings ever published in people with Alzheimer's disease. And we showed very significant links between how the immune system functions and then how you can say cognitive function is essentially a proxy measure of brain function,
Mm-hmm.
although there's not really a good way to assess that. I mean, we could have, had we had the funding, we
Mm-hmm.
could have looked at images of the brain, a CT scan or something. But again, we didn't, because of our budget being so limited, we didn't have imaging data. But these were very significant findings and we've published subsequently, as I mentioned, 4 papers. So the next 3 papers, we continued demonstrating links between the immune system's functioning and brain health. So the microbiome would certainly be another area. In fact, we've already talked about adding that as part of the assessment when we do a second study. We just didn't do anything like that in the first study. And we didn't have,
Yeah, you didn't have the funding, but
right.
they say that 80% of your immune system is in your gut. So honestly, I think the baseline for all health is starting in the digestive tract. And if
No
that's
doubt.
determined that if you have toxicity there, you're going to have a compromised immune system. And then you're probably going to have a compromised brain because they are all integrated. That no accident, it's called integrative medicine, right? The new
That's right.
alternative allopathic medicine. So okay, so let's go back to this immune system issue because I think our viewers and listeners need to know some of these terms so that they understand how the immune system is just like the conductor of the orchestra, as I think you said in one of your talks. Uh,
Yes.
and that does require homeostasis and getting homeostasis which means that, everything is in balance. So getting that in your immune system is a huge challenge, and particularly in today's toxic world with all the bad influences we have. So start us from the base, like, okay, what is the CD4 and the CD8? Tell us more about the ratio and what those individually mean to individuals who are getting their blood work done.
Well, I don't. So unless somebody has like an autoimmune issue, maybe HIV, rheumatoid arthritis, even multiple sclerosis, I think probably, I mean, I don't know about you. I don't think you commonly necessarily look for your CD4 to CD8 ratio. I mean, I think that's probably fairly uncommon. It's really more research wise. People tend to look at things like that just to, again, assess. So you have helper cells that do things like assist other cells, which is why it's called helper.
Yeah,
You're helping other immune cells do their job, whether that's counteracting a bacteria or a virus or responding to some sort of an inflammatory signal. And
yeah,
then you have the cytotoxic cell, the CD8, which is your cell that goes out and actually kills the virus or the bacteria or disrupts that type of replication. So
right.
again, as I mentioned, those are very important for all of us. I don't want anybody to think, oh, well, that's just for people with Alzheimer's disease. No, that's not, again, those are very important for all of us, especially once we hit middle age. And then as we go through the rest of our lives, we want that ratio to be optimized as much as possible. And so that was one of the ways that you can look at overall immune function. That just kind of gives you sort of a helicopter or high level view, if you will, of how your overall immune system is functioning. So if you have an inverted ratio, in other words, if the ratio is below 1.0, then that's probably not optimal because again, now you have too many cytotoxic cells
Yeah,
in relationship to your helper cells. And that's not optimal at all. In fact, and if you look at the HIV literature, if
yeah,
you have HIV infection and you have an inverted ratio, you're actually at greater risk of things like diabetes, cancer, and heart disease, on top of all of the effects you're dealing with from HIV itself. So that's a very important ratio to to me, at the very minimum, at least have over 1.0. You want it to be positively calculated
right.
above 1.0.
You know,
So,
John, my doctor routinely has me do every time I do once a year blood work. And last time was 20 vials. So she's really
wow.
thorough. And she always has me look at the immune system balance. So the CD4 and CD8, and then the natural killer cells. So basically, maybe take it one step further and tell us about. So the CD4 help, the CD8 suppress. If there are bad guys around, they'll go in and help. And then what do the natural killer cells do?
The natural killer cells are our first line of defense against virus and transformed or carcinogenic cells. So obviously we want our immune system, and it's all of its many different roles. We have all of these different subsets of the immune system. We want our natural killer cells to be able to recognize when you have a virus, to be able to recognize, because all of our cells are constantly going through apoptosis, this life-death cycle. And within that normal cycle, a cell dies off, and then our macrophage consume that wasted material, that dying cellular byproduct, if you will, and
Right.
then there's no problem.
Right.
But if a cell is dying and it's not properly eliminated, if our natural killer cells do not recognize it and eliminate it,
Right.
what happens to us? Well, we could end up with carcinogenesis, which leads to cancer, atherogenesis, which leads to cardiovascular disease, two of the most important things. So we want our natural killer cells surveillant, ready for action, ready to do their job. And that's a big part of the job, is eliminating those transforming dying cells. And so we have to have a very good natural killer cell activity, cytotoxicity, to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think if people understand that all health begins in the cells, and that your ATP, which is like the master energizer of every cell. So if you're not getting all this garbage cleanup, your cells are going to suffer, and you're going to feel it, low energy, and those more serious consequences that you just mentioned. So
That's right.
that's why there's so many senolytics on the market today, right? So people are looking at ways to clean up cellular debris. And like, what are some of the ingredients other than these polysaccharides that you think help with in the senolytic formulas?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, in our formula, we have Ultra Terra clay, which is a very important component to our formula. That's a bentonite clay. It comes from an old lake in Mississippi. It's got all this micronutrition in it, but also the clay in general. When you think of clays and how humans have used clays for healing purposes for millennia, really, they strip out all of this toxic. You mentioned toxins a few moments ago. All of
Right.
these toxins that we accumulate, and you can eat, the most perfect diet. You can exercise every day. You can do all these things, but you're still exposed to pollution in the environment. There's no escaping pollution at any level on our
Right.
planet, unfortunately. And so, as we build up heavy metals, arsenic, PCBs, PHAs, I mean, there's all sorts of stuff
Right.
floating around now in the environment, in our water, soil, and air. We accumulate that stuff over time. So the clay is a very potent chelator or detoxifier of those things. So it's not only helping to nourish on one side, but it's also helping to clean up on the other side. So that's a very important component to the formula. Something like N-acetylcysteine, that's a very, very important. It's a hybrid of cysteine, the amino acid that is more commonly thought of, but N-acetylcysteine is the metabolic precursor to glutathione, which is referred to as our master antioxidant.
Right.
And unfortunately, as we age, like many things, our body makes less glutathione.
Yeah.
Glutathione is also there's been technological challenges with trying to create an oral glutathione that's actually effective, because the body's hydrochloric acid breaks it down very rapidly when you
Right.
consume it orally. So you see a lot of these, specialty clinics, anti-aging clinics, whatever you want to call them, offering IV glutathione, but you can boost your level of glutathione with oral NAC. So oral NAC is a very important nutrient that can be used not only for boosting your glutathione, but also helping in the clay do its job with cleaning out things. It's actually used if you've ever heard of anybody having an acetaminophen toxic exposure, NAC is used to counteract that. So it's very good for helping the liver to detoxify any type of toxification,
Right.
acute situation like that. NAC is your go-to nutrient for that. And I mean, it's had so many studies done on it. It's a really powerful and incredible nutrient.
Right. I'm so glad you brought that up. A lot of people don't understand. They take these glutathione pills, and they don't
Right.
realize they're just basically it's expensive urine, because they're
That's
not
right.
getting benefit. Quicksilver Scientific does a liposomal glutathione, and I've been told even that is, even though it's going right into your bloodstream, it's still not doing the full job. So taking the precursor of NAC, which is absorbable, it does help to boost it. And if you want to do it both ways, now at the show, there was a company called Aura Wellness, and they do a surface oil now, glutathione. That's their kind of their flagship product. So I bought a couple of bottles, and I'm sort of I don't use it every single day because I know I'm taking NAC, so I don't feel the compulsion. But I know it's really supposed to be, because it's going through the skin, a much more efficacious way to get the benefits of glutathione. But even when you do the IV, it helps you for about the first hour. But after an IV, people don't always realize it's because IVs are very effective, but they don't last. So,
Right.
yeah, I do them occasionally, but then I know that when I walk out the door about an hour later, I'm probably ready to go to the bathroom, right? And and you can see the vitamin C in your urine. It's just so
Hmm.
bright colored, right? So
That's right.
glad you're talking about that, because your product does go to a point, but it doesn't mean, and it's a very good point, I should say, a very strong. The ingredients in the product are amazing, but however, there are ways to partner with other nutrients to just make the process even more potent and powerful and efficacious, right?
That's
So
right.
and what about like our lipoic acid and the B complex vitamins? Are those? Would you put those on a list of nutrients to take for people to take if they wanted to combine it with your product?
Oh, I would think so. There has been some really interesting research conducted on our lipoic acid, as you mentioned. I mean, it definitely has lots of different cardiovascular and cognitive function effects. So I would say that yes, if you are taking any type of lipoic acid, I would consider the R form over the alpha form, generally speaking.
Right,
And then,
because it's
and then
more,
you,
more absorbable, right? And particularly in
that's right.
older people who are more your target audience for Alzheimer's. So yeah, it's kind of
That's right.
like the same thing with what's the other one that oh my gosh, it's just skipping my mind. Oh, we're supposed to take one form over the other because it's much more potent. I'll think of it in a moment.
You're talking
But
about CoQ10?
yeah, CoQ10 and ubiquinol. That
Yes.
was it. Thank you, thank you, thank
Correct.
you. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, so people don't often realize that CoQ10 isn't as absorbable as ubiquinol. So and that's just another one. But, when I took the genetic test, I took it from the DNA company out of Toronto, and it was a 60-page test. Very difficult. I mean, wonderful information, but you can't make a most people, they don't send you a copy because of course they'd go broke if they were sending out all those copies. But um, I didn't, I was lucky enough. I don't have the APO4 gene, so that was a big, relief. And then that breast cancer gene, I didn't have that. But what if somebody does have these results that are positive? How does epigenetics play a role? And I'm sure you looked into this because you're, dealing with Alzheimer's. How does epigenetics play a role against or in combination with your genetic blueprint? And how would you guide people if they do get a positive result to say that doesn't mean you have a death sentence, that you're going to get Alzheimer's, because your epigenetics, which is your lifestyle, will could prevent that from ever happening. So how do you explain that from a medical and scientific standpoint?
Well, you just said it. I totally agree with you. Just because you have a mutation on your genetic side does not mean it's a death sentence. So I would tell people not to freak out about any genetic testing that they've received and really focus. If they were not already focused on their lifestyle, then, like at that point, that's really when it becomes a real necessity to do so, because then ultimately, if you don't, you would end up being more likely to be a statistic or a number based on that genetic risk. So you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the best way that, lay people can understand how our genes function is that our genes do not really do anything until they receive information from the environment. And then it's kind of like if you use the analogy of a gun, a gun by itself can't do anything to another person or an animal or whatever, but you put ammunition in that gun and then you pull the trigger and that's where it can do damage. Same
Right.
thing with our genes, right? I mean, so our genes are sitting there waiting on information from the environment, and usually the most readily available source of information that our genes receive is what we stick in our mouths. So every time we bend our elbow, open our mouth and put something in it, that's where our genes are getting information. And going back to the polysaccharides for a minute, that's where I would argue that the polysaccharides can make such a huge difference in someone's life, not just from the brain health perspective, but really head to toe, is that these polysaccharides have so much coded information in them that is beneficial, not detrimental. And so taking these polysaccharides every day, you are instructing the cells through the guidance by the genes and how to function properly.
Yes.
So it's a very important tool in your toolbox to utilize to help you with that. But generally speaking, I mean, we know, just again, don't take my word for it. Go to PubMed and do your own literature search. If
Hmm.
you look at all of the lifestyle data out there, nutrition, physical activity, exercise, dietary supplementation, smoking or not, of course, those are very specific behaviors related to certain cancers and other diseases,
Hmm.
use of alcohol,
Hmm.
stress management, sleep, all these different things. Nutrition, and I'm lumping everything about nutrition under sort of one umbrella, your diet, your supplementation, all these things together. But far and away, nutrition is the number one lifestyle choice that we can make, good or bad, depending on how you utilize it,
Yeah.
to your detriment or to your benefit in terms of your ultimate health outcome. So
Yeah.
circling that all the way back, you have somebody who does genetic testing. Maybe they have the mutation of the ApoE4 allele on one side, or maybe they even have both.
Yeah.
Uh, just, again, don't freak out about it. Just be, starting from that point, be very vigilant about how you take care of yourself. And then hopefully through your own activity, through your own lifestyle, you will keep that genetic risk, under the cover, if you will, lack of a better
Right.
analogy, and
Yeah.
not allow it to express in a way that would ultimately lead you to having Alzheimer's disease.
It's so interesting because you're absolutely right, and it's important that people hear this because very often people get the results of their genetic test and they think that's a life sentence or a death sentence, like we said, to their lives, and they then start having these negativity because your attitude and your thoughts create a reality. And so if you're
That's right.
attracting that kind of energy of negativity about your genetic results. So with mine, I said to the people at DNA, the CEO, how come I have the obesity gene? I said, I've been a size 6 since I was in my teens. And he said, well, yeah, but that's because you learned early on to all the nutrients that are important to your life, and you've been very disciplined. If you weren't, and he's right, because a lot of my family members were very heavy. And
Mm.
so it must be something, inherited. My father, however, was not. So he had other issues, but, with stress management and that kind of thing. But that, and then they also told me that I had a dopamine or neurotransmitter, slow converter of serotonin and dopamine. And yet I'm one of the most positive people you will ever meet. So rather, and I'm only mentioning this about me because it does express to the point of what you're saying, that don't take it as a sentence. This isn't just an outline. It's a
That's
basic.
right.
Recognize that you are very lucky. Actually, I've converted this into a very positive and said, wow, it really does work to be disciplined and to be knowledgeable and to take action and be proactive about learning, like with discovering you, Dr. John, is, it really has been a huge benefit. And I want to talk about that in just a moment. But so I just want to be sure we express that to people, that just because you get that, gene doesn't mean you're going to get Alzheimer's. So, or any other condition.
That's right. Well, and the other thing that people should understand is we have over 40,000 genes.
I know that's amazing.
So just one gene in
Right,
the context of 40,000, like,
right,
people don't get freaked out over one
right.
gene out of 40,000.
Yeah,
There's a lot of there's a lot of activity going on here at
yes,
the genetic level. And so you have the opportunity to overcome anything. And also we get sucked into this notion, and particularly in our culture, of the magic bullet, right? Like we want to look for that one thing that
yes,
we can do, or that one thing that's so important over everything else. That's not the way our physiology works. So
yes.
just to your point, it's so the approach should be so comprehensive and should take into consideration lots of other factors. So don't get misled, or excuse me, don't get caught up into this idea of one magic bullet or one key. No, it's a lot of things going into this equation.
Well, that's why it's good segue, because I want to talk a little bit about what happened to me, because you were so kind to send me some samples to try, which I have been routinely using since I received them, and that's a couple of months now. I must say I like the capsules better because I travel a lot. So the daily brain care comes in powder, which is much more absorbable. I recognize that. I much prefer using powders and liquids for not having to go through the liver like a capsule does. However, with people who are busy lives like me, popping a capsule is sometimes easier than the 2 times a day. But I just wanted to let you have some feedback publicly that after I started taking your product along with Dr. Dale Bredesen, who is, do you know Dr. Dale Bredesen? Written the book about ending Alzheimer's, and Dr. Dane Goodnow, who is one of my very close allies, and I'm in his clinical. I'm like a protege to him, so he gives me all these products. That he's the founder of Plasmalogens, and they're like the fish oils. I mean, I'm being simplistic because I don't want to spend time on their products. But when I started taking, I was already taking his Plasmalogens, which you take in the morning and take at night. And then I started taking your product, and then Dale Bredesen has the both of these men are experts in Alzheimer's, and so Dale Bredesen's company is called Apollo Health, and he has a product called NeuroQ. So I can't, say, because I was taking all three, if one or the other is better or has more efficacy with me. But I can tell you that what started happening, all these memories started coming back. Things that, I hadn't thought about for 20 years, and names of people started popping into my head. Like, how did I ever remember that person? I hardly ever knew them. And then my dreams have been like in Technicolor, much more vivid. And I always used to dream a lot, but I would never remember them in the morning. Now it seems like I can remember really vivid details of the dream. Sometimes they're not so good because we all have stress levels and challenges, and sometimes our dreams will tell us more than, look why Dr. Freud told us how important the dreams are to our mental health. But I just wanted people to know that I highly recommend your product, and maybe people should just do your product alone and see how that works for them, because you don't have to be doing what I'm doing, which is because all three of you have been guests on my podcast. So I obviously want to be a steward of and be able to, a spokesperson, and be able to speak about my personal experience. So my question is, how long, for a healthy person like me, who isn't dealing with, thank goodness, any issues, but wants to do it proactively, how long should I, as one individual, one example, how long should people like me take your product?
You mean to notice an effect, or what?
No. Just because we're taking it preventatively,
Right.
not
Well,
not
So
issue?
So oxygen obviously is our first nutrient, and then we need water after that. And then after that, we need everything else. They sort of fall into place. But I've been on my own formula for over 10 years. I've had my mother on it for, I think mom's been on it for about 13, maybe 14 years. My wife started taking it when she was pregnant with our first child over 5 years ago. I started my daughter on it when she turned 6 months of age, and
Mm-hmm.
she's going to be I'm sorry, 5 in March. So
Mm-hmm.
I say all that to say that number one, I'd be a hypocrite if I wasn't taking my own stuff. But number two, that prevention is, to me, is as important as anything else in terms of, not to your point of not wanting to get any health issue. And I'm
Right.
glad you don't have any health issue, but this is not something you just take and then, you do it for a few months and that's it. You don't need it anymore. No, this is again, like, just like oxygen, you need these polysaccharides every day, and you're not getting, I mean, I don't know about you. We have aloe vera growing in our backyard, but I'm not out there snipping leaves off every day and sucking the gel down. It tastes nasty,
It does.
and it's 99% water. So the polysaccharide content is so diluted in the water, it's pretty irrelevant.
Mm-hmm.
So we've done the hard work for everybody. We've concentrated it into a powder that you can take every day and benefit from. And again, I would say that anybody that want to take daily brain care along with whatever else they take every day would certainly be adding a tool to his or her toolbox. That, I mean, I stand by everything that we've done. I didn't the daily brain care is not just some slick marketing idea. This is the baby of decades of research that my colleagues and I have conducted. If I was only trying to make a lot of money, I did a very poor job of it, because I spent all of those years at the university not making a lot of money and doing all of this research. And so
Right.
this is my inanimate baby that I'm trying to spread a message of to people, and all this science that we've published in the peer-reviewed literature. And so I would just say, you want to take this for the rest of your life. We don't know, prevention is kind of the unanswerable question. We don't know how prevention works until, unfortunately, we get to the end of our lives. And then we didn't die from Alzheimer's, or we didn't die from cancer, or,
Right.
whatever other killer. We don't know that until the very end. But at least, again, you're giving yourself the possibility of not dying from those things, which to
Right.
me is very important.
Yeah, and when you do your biological age, which at A4M, they have a number of different people, vendors that are testing you. True Diagnostics is the one that I've used, and it tells you, just basically how all your systems are working. It's really the health of your organs and the functioning integratively of those, rather than your how many years around the sun have you. And mine came out 20 years younger, and I know, and I'm just telling people this, I know it's not just an accident. It wouldn't be that if I were not so disciplined and proactive about taking products like yours. So I'm glad you answered that question. So now I know I have to be your lifetime customer. And by the way, everybody, if you go on Amazon, there are so many products that are not scientifically backed. It's kind of disgusting. I'm not saying I want FDA approval for supplements. That's not, I'm not going to that extreme, because the FDA has its own issues. However, I do feel that we should be very discerning about the supplements that we take, and know that they've been third party tested, or they've had the scientific research like you've done for all those years, that are backing them up, and that there's not, and that they are what they say they are, because many of these products have been tested and found that they don't contain what they say they do. So
Right.
I'm not going against Amazon. I order there sometimes, but I always make sure that the who I'm ordering from on Amazon is the company, not some outlaw in China or somewhere that's
That's right.
mimicking that company. So I think that's really important. Well, so if people want to order your product, John, how do they do that?
Well, speaking of the devil, they can order on Amazon if they prefer that. We have a Dr. Lewis Nutrition store on Amazon, but we actually prefer people come to our website, drlewisnutrition.com. That's Dr. No period Lewis, Lewis nutrition.com. We have just a ton of information on that website. and they can learn all about all the research we've conducted, what went into the creation of daily brain care. And as you mentioned, we have it both in powder and capsule form. We are under the Dr. Lewis Nutrition channel on all the typical social media as well. So you can go to YouTube or Instagram or Facebook or even TikTok, I guess, for the next month or two anyway.
Hey, let's see how
Um,
let's see if they can get that.
Exactly. See if that continues. But we
Yeah.
have a lot of videos, especially on the YouTube channel, that are obviously shorter in nature. They're not as descriptive as all the information on the website, but we have product reviews, testimonial videos, all sorts of blogs, all sorts of links to podcasts like what I'm doing with you today. So really the website is the best source of information for people who like to read. And if people have questions, they can email us, they can give us a call. I'm always happy to help people with personal questions, although we have a ton of information just on the FAQ section alone. We have a ton of information. So I would encourage people to go to our website and learn more. But again, if they have specific questions, they're more than welcome to reach out to us.
Yeah, and the other thing I want people to know is this is not some big conglomerate. This is not.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, this is one man with a mission who has a
That's right.
support staff and who's passionate about helping people to be healthy. And
That's right.
so I think that in itself, the entrepreneurial and the kind of pioneer and warrior aspect of that is it's very American, and it's very heartening that you have stuck your neck out like you have to make this possible for all of us. So thank you, John.
Thank
Well,
you.
just so you know, we are on all the major podcast sites. So, and we also do reels after. We'll be asking you to collaborate on reels so that we'll be promoting your who you are on all of our social media. So we have a partnership established now. We'll be on yours and you'll be on ours, and more and more we get the word out to people that and that's why I spent a few moments saying about my own personal experience, because I think people need to know that I'm not here. I don't even look at my podcast as a commercial enterprise. I look at it as a philanthropic. And that's why I don't do all these subscriber things like everybody else does. And I don't put now I will say that very often if you want to do this we can talk about it offline, but very often our guests want to give an incentive for the first time buyers of their products, just to they give them some kind of an initial whatever,
Mhm.
whether it's a discount or a free PDF or whatever. So if that's something you want to do, let me know that, and I'll put it on our website as part of
Okay.
the, so people will be motivated to try. Even it isn't about price, because your prices are very reasonable and for what you're getting. So it's not that, but everybody's watching their pocketbooks right now. So
That's
okay,
right.
well, we had a great time. I love talking to you. I hope you felt the same.
Yes. Thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure to be here with you today.
All right. Well, you go get some sleep and take
Thank
care.
you.
You need to stay healthy. All
Yes. Tthank you so much.
right. Okay. Thank you. Bye bye,
Thank
John.
you. Bye bye.